So what if ancient prophecies weren't just written in books, but in the stars? It's a wild thought, right? Well, today we're diving into this really fascinating and yeah, pretty complex theory from a YouTube channel called Ministry Revealed. They're making this huge claim that biblical prophecy, ancient calendars, and even astronomy all link up and point to one really surprising answer.
And check this out. This is a direct quote from the guy behind the theory. You can just feel the intensity, right? The passion behind this idea we're about to get into. He is absolutely convinced that the constellation Taurus is the key, the one thing that unlocks this massive prophetic puzzle. But okay, what is the puzzle we're even talking about?
So at the core of all this is a problem that, scholars have wrestled with for ages. It's this whole thing of trying to line up all these different timelines you find in biblical prophecy. You've got this tangled web of dates, cosmic cycles, countdowns, and on the surface they don't seem to fit together at all.
And that's the big question, isn't it? How does all this stuff fit? But here's the thing. This theory we're looking at says, hey, those aren't contradictions. It's suggesting they're more like interlocking gears in some kind of huge, grand celestial clock. And the one key you need to wind that clock, you guessed it. He argues it's the constellation Taurus.
All right, so to start putting this puzzle together, we actually have to begin on Earth, not up in the stars just yet. It all kicks off with understanding two different Hebrew calendars and let's say, a very specific way of looking at a modern 70-year countdown.
Okay, so here's the first critical piece you've got to get. There were two different New Years. The original one, going all the way back to creation, started in the fall. Simple enough. But then, boom, during the Exodus, there's this major change. God commands that the start of the year gets moved to the spring. Now, according to this theory, that switch wasn't just random. Nope, it's a huge clue.
Okay, let's fast forward to the modern timeline. A lot of people who follow prophecy, they start this 70-year countdown from 1948, right? The year Israel was founded. Makes sense. But this theory makes a really crucial distinction. It says the prophecies are specifically about Jerusalem. So if that's true, the clock couldn't start ticking until 1950, which is when Jerusalem actually became the capital.
And it gets even more specific. The theory points to this passage in Leviticus that talks about planting all manner of trees when you enter the land. Well, that happened in 1951. So the logic here is that the prophetic 70-year timeline couldn't really begin until both of those things were done. Jerusalem had to be the capital, and the trees had to be planted. Now, definitely keep that little tree detail in the back of your mind. It's going to come back in a big way later on.
All right, so we've got our timelines here on Earth. Now, let's look up. Let's head to the stars and see how this theory builds a bridge to this cosmic calendar. The next piece of our puzzle is a huge astronomical cycle that actually slowly changes which constellation marks the beginning of the year.
Yeah, this massive cycle has a big name, the precession of the equinoxes. But the easiest way to picture it is just think of a spinning top, how it has that slow wobble when it's a little off balance. That's kind of what the Earth does, but it takes 26,000 years to complete one wobble. And over all that time, this wobble makes it seem like the constellations are just slowly drifting, changing which one pops up at key moments like the first day of spring.
And this right here, this is where that celestial shift becomes the absolute backbone of the whole theory. The claim is that way back at creation, when the years started in the fall, Taurus was the constellation right there at that moment. Then, thousands of years go by, that wobble happens. By the time of Moses, when the new year is moved to the spring, guess where Taurus is? It's now aligned with that new start time. And now, fast forward to today, the shift has continued, and Taurus lines up with the month of Sivan, which just so happens to be the wheat harvest.
So that brings us to the next layer. This is where the theory connects that astronomical timeline to a really specific passage from the New Testament, one that's all about the timing of harvests.
And this verse is seen as a major clue. Jesus is telling his disciples, hey, you guys think the harvest is still 4 months away. But then he corrects them. He says, look now, the fields are already ready. So the theory says this isn't just about farming, it's a prophetic instruction telling us to look for a timeline that wraps up 4 months sooner than anybody expects.
So check out how this calculation clicks into place. Step 1. The modern wheat harvest, which is a key prophetic event, starts when the sun is in Taurus. Got it. Step 2. You apply that clue from Jesus, count back 4 months. And here it is. This is the connection that supposedly ties it all together.
When you count back 4 months from the harvest, you land directly on a date known as the New Year of Trees. Remember those trees from 1951? Well, this is the link.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together now. We've got the 2 calendars, that specific 70-year count, the massive 26,000-year celestial clock, and that 4-month harvest clue. This is where the whole thing comes together.
So, point number 1. At the dawn of time, the new year started in the fall, and the theory says that way back then, Taurus was the constellation that marked that cosmic beginning.
Point number 2. Thousands of years later, the sky has shifted. The theory argues that when God commanded the new year to be moved to the spring, it wasn't a random decision. It was a divine alignment, basically moving the calendar to follow Taurus to its new spot in the sky.
And finally, point 3. Here in our time, Taurus has shifted again, and now it lines up with the wheat harvest. This is what gives us that final anchor point for the 4-month calculation, the clue that connects our modern time directly back to that prophetic new year of trees.
And that, right there, is the heart of the revelation. Taurus, Taurus, Taurus. The idea is that it's not one random alignment. It's 3 totally distinct moments in history where this constellation supposedly acted as the celestial marker for a key prophetic beginning. First at creation, then at the giving of the law, and now at the dawn of what some call the end times. So when you get right down to it, this whole theory is a deep dive into that very question. What happens when you try to map ancient prophecy onto modern astronomy? It gives you this framework where faith, history, and the stars aren't separate things at all, but are all woven together into one massive cosmic story. Now, whether you buy into it or not, you got to admit, it's a pretty wild idea to think about.